Welcome to The Spirit of Revolution by Roger Hallam. Roger is currently serving a 5-year sentence in prison for taking proportionate action on the climate crisis. He is recording these podcasts down the prison phone line. Spirit of Revolution introduces the big questions of life. For example, how will humanity face the challenges of the next few decades? The odds seem impossible, yet history shows us that when everything seems lost, people find a way. The key? Spirit. A hidden force that the powerful overlook, but that drives revolutions and shapes new worlds. This podcast is your guide to harnessing that spirit, fueling the movements that will change our future. The revolution starts now. Are you ready?
This call is from a person currently in a prison in England. All calls are logged and recorded and may be listened to by a member of prison staff.
This is the last of our episodes on aspects of the non-rational, before we take this big leap I've been talking about. Ritual seems to be on the other side of the rational, from emotion and suffering. With emotion and suffering, it's as if this supposed rational mind of ours is overwhelmed with the drama of being. The surge of emotion comes through us. The suffering seems to destroy us, and yet we find ourselves growing through the process. Getting lost leads to being found. Ritual, as I'm going to discuss, seems to do the opposite. It leaves the self. We escape from ourselves, as you might say. Ritual points not to drama, but to its absence, an emptiness. But the revelation here, the paradox, is that in this emptiness there is something, though not a thing. Or, to put it another way, it is a thing, but it's not a thing at the same time. I am reminded of the situation we discussed in physics, where there is an empty space, but in some vital sense it is not empty. There is a sort of thing going on there. We don't need to fear the emptiness then. We can lose our ego, and when we do, we don't cease to be. Because the crucial realization is that we are not just our ego. There is something else that we are. This is not some big drama enlightenment thing. The realization is rooted in our everyday empirical observations. What we have been doing in these episodes, just looking and seeing what is actually going on. Ritual then is about the everyday, not the big events, big ceremonies, big initiations. It is rooted in what happens in between the official occasions, what does not get noticed by the conventional way of seeing. The space between the nodes, between the supposed real things. For instance, making dinner, going to the loo, clearing up, closing the curtains. Around all the pressure of this ego that we are supposed to protect, there is a world of stuff that is just going on. I'm not going to give a definition of ritual, but rather I'm going to meander around a bunch of things. Or non-things, as slight provocations, to get a sense of how ritual works, and thus how there is an ecology of modes of being. So when we come to maybe give up on this ego thing for a while, as we go into the future episodes, we can know there are other places to be. It's not going to be all or nothing. Maybe as we go through this little tour, we can envisage sitting there in the road, and that itself can be a ritual, a thing in itself, self-sufficient. So I'd like to say also, before I start, I based this episode on a few ideas from a book called Disappearance of Rituals. Let's dive in then with a well-known ritual, the Japanese tea ceremony. The main idea here, I guess, is that nothing is going on. It does not have a purpose beyond itself. The focus is on the form and the aesthetic. we find ourselves critical of it maybe. Like, what's the point? Isn't it a bit boring? Nothing is happening. At the same time, maybe there is the idea of, aha, that is the whole point. And it's actually quite cool. The tea is being poured, the tea is drunk, there are two people, they are connected in the presence of each other, but there is no communication. There is no having a mad natter or a gossip where you're not aware that you're having a drink. The opposite is happening. There is no communication, but in the absence of communication, there is not simply silence or emptiness. It's not boring because there is something else going on in that silence, something beyond the ego. I would also like to start with another introductory example. I've been reading about another Japanese ritual recently. The idea is you choose some everyday item, a button, a coin, and you put it in a box, and then you paint the box and decorate it as nicely as you can. And then you give it to someone. They open it up. But the point is not what is inside it. The point is the box in which there is a thing. The thing is actually the container, the box. It is pointless to spend too much time on the box, but that's the whole point. There's something subversive about this I like. Something about the ritual destroying meaning, the oppression of a surplus of meaning, the heaviness of expectation, and points to something without meaning or beyond it. It's mysterious, which is kind of amusing. It creates a curiosity, a moving outside maybe. So let's meander around a bunch of other happenings or practices. Let's move outside for a bit. Leading on from the box example, there seems to be something about ritual which is not about production, making stuff and lots of it. It is not about the rational mind working things out, getting things done. As such, it undermines the core ideology of neoliberalism, the system of meaning imposed upon us, that it's all about production, producing stuff and more of it, overproduction, in fact. This might explain why ritual is denigrated and made invisible in our culture, because of its subversive quality in the present context. Ritual has been described as being at home in the world. This is the opposite of what the regime wants. It wants us to have a feeling of lack, of unfinishedness, of having still to get things done. So ritual, in contrast, is about presence, paying attention, and repetition. Things in themselves, activities that we are in the routine of doing, that don't go beyond themselves. You do them in a sort of flow, like how you might do gardening. It does not go anywhere. The weeds come back, the veg gets cropped, winter kills everything. It can feel quite dispiriting at times, from a getting things done point of view. Like, what have you got to show for yourself? But in another sense, that's the whole point, isn't it? That it doesn't actually go anywhere. You are just sitting there pulling weeds out. You might say it's my personal ritual. Weeding has been a big part of my life, but I cannot show you anything for all that effort. There's just a field, like there was before, which is nice in a way. I'm not under the weight of some achievement. What we have then in ritual instead is an emphasis on beauty, aesthetics, art, or just manners. We have symbol rather than a communication of something. The ego is a bit lost by all this. But again, that is the whole point. This is not about production. And an added richness is when this non-productiveness is done in a social context, when it becomes an act of coming together. Like the breaking of bread. You take a piece of bread and pass it on to the next person. It might be more efficient for everyone just to have a piece of bread put on their plate, but such a production point of view cannot see something else, what is actually really going on, which is the connection created by the giving of the bread to the person next to you, and the repetition of this act over and over again, going around in a circle. The sense of being at home is not the creation of the conscious ego. It does not come through thought, but through the ritualistic movement of the body in the presence of other bodies doing likewise. Feeling at home in the world, then, has to do with acting with others, not about being alone. This, then, connects with a rejection of the idea of personal, individual authenticity, what might be called the production of the self. Trying to make ourselves into something, into a thing, a product, something we have to feel good about, defined as something we can sell, promote to others. All this is seen as the essence of neoliberalism, the new modern regime. So it is not so much our labour that is being exploited, but it is we who are taught and pressured to exploit ourselves, to make ourselves into something, to continually reproduce ourselves to be better and more authentic. This supposed authenticity of the self, then, is not the transcendence of the self. It is, in fact, the exact opposite. It is a doubling down on our obsession with the self. Self-care, then, is really the narcissism of the self. This is the case in a social media context, particularly where young people are pressurized into being obsessed with who they are, how they look, with being a product. This, then, is the enemy of the social, the enemy of real community, the engagement in acts of service with others, a leaving of the self behind. Promotion of the self is the opposite of ritual. Instead of everything being reduced down into content, intensity, there is this focus instead on form, an escape for a while from the weight of self-expectation. And in this emptiness, ironically, we see so much more. There is this re-enchantment of the world that comes into being, of not having to know, not having to have everything tied down, but simply just participating in the world. Ritual, then, can be associated with play. It is free. It is not the factory for the production of things or the production of selves. Instead of the obsession with the self, we escape by putting on a face, by doing an act. As in art, there is no set communication or discourse. In the festival of play, there is no oppressive big point to it at all. Like in sport, it is important without being important. The rituals of the football match are real enough, without any claim to be important in some serious worldly way. After all that is happening is that a ball is being kicked around. But it's also obvious that is not all that is happening. It makes sense without having to have some big rationale about it. This play can, however, become what the French thinker Georges Bataille calls strong play. We can take this sense of play into the ritualizing of more serious competition, the debate, the duel, into the traditional ritualization of warfare in pre-modern contexts, the fight between two champions. The ritual somehow gives a meaning over and above the violence itself. This is very different to the brutality of modern warfare as a question of production, where it is all about which side can produce the most stuff that can kill the most people. For Bataille, there is always what he calls a surplus that has to be expended, a surplus of energy or of production, but also of meaning. We can use ritualistic competition as an alternative to the destruction through violence. Resistance, then, can be seen as a way of doing away with this surplus. Maybe more people would enter into resistance if it was ritualized, made into something which did not have to have the heaviness of this excess of meaning, which becomes a form of strong play. I am reminded here of the confrontations between the black rights resistors and the police in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. One of the black organizers went up to the guy running the police operation and suggested they take a break for lunch. They both agreed. They all took 1 hour off. This broke the logic of production, the reductive materialism of modern political struggle. It instead opened up a space for humanity, play, humor even. It reminds everyone of their essential communality, like playing football on Christmas Day in no man's land in World War I. These things are presented by the ruling ideology, not just as meaningless, but worse, as transgression. But in fact, they are the deepest forms of resistance. Ritual resists the reduction of life to one flat plane, to the tyranny of a rational justice that can see nothing but itself. Ritual then is not just idle play on the margins of the important and the real. It can and does stride into the moments of greatest intensity, into the moments of life transition, into the moment of death itself, the agony of grief. There is a quote that ritual insulates the skin from the atrocious burns of suffering. It protects us against the abyss of being. Without ritual, we are unprotected from life, exposed. But this is not due to the production of something. There is no materiality to it. No one is building a physical wall. Ritual has no rational explanation because it is not about the mind. It is not about psychology. It is not even about words. The emptiness, this void, the world of pain, is responded to in the ritual act, the black clothes, the funeral march, the burial. There is a doing something without doing something, and it all helps. We don't get closure. There is no reason for it. How can there ever be? No reason will help. If anything, reasons only make the grief worse. The closure comes through ritual, not because of it. It is not caused. So having done a mini tour of the landscape of ritual, we might come back to this foundational idea of the promotion of form over content. There is a surplus of the signifier, as some intellectual people say. Like a poem is self-evidently more than the words. A witticism cannot be reduced to what it means. It can just be funny. When I listen to a Martin Luther King speech, I am swept away on a wave after just a few moments. There is something in the sound and the rhythm of his voice. It is not about what he's saying, it's about how he says it. The philosopher Kant, apparently, was not into music, as it had no set meaning. It could do no work, which of course is the whole point. It takes you away. It can be so intense, but what it actually means, well, no one really can say without sounding a bit silly. And what happens when we see a glorious work of art? You can try and put it into words, but you know it's like running along the ground when you need to be flying through the air. The more we look around us in the world, the more we realize that it is actually full of all these rituals in the wider sense of the word. Life goes on, as they say. There is an endless and irreducible thickness to it, a ground below all the dramas of our ego. There is always the washing up. Even when all this is denied, it seems ritual slips back in. Materialists, those who think that the world is all about power, who refuse to see any sense of the transcendent, still find themselves up to their ears in ritualistic stuff. The Russian communists had their rallies, their parades, salutes, all that dressing up, all the showiness. On the other hand, the essence of true ritual has to be its subtleness. It cannot be declared, thrust upon the multitude. Some of the Extinction Rebellion ceremonies at its peak felt a bit like that. And now we are going to have a ceremony. Oh right, jump to it. Ritual, at its best, I think, is slipped into the social space. It is designed for people to be aware of without becoming an imposition. It is the lubricant of social connection, not the glue. Which brings us back to the pouring of the tea in Japan. The point is not about generousness or gratitude, some big statement about ethics or morals. There is just a politeness. There are rules, but not virtues. This obviously does not mean that ethics and virtues are not important. Life cannot just be about pouring tea, but the point is that part of life should be about pouring tea. Life is about truth, but it is also about myth. A conversation is about information, about argument, but it is also about banter, gossip, self-depreciation, bringing each other up and down, a play, a sport. Within the protection of ritual, protecting us from the raw edges of life, preparing us for the hardships to come. Let's finish then with our ongoing theme of this spirit of revolution, our resistance. I am in this prison cell, but to say so is a reduction. To say so is to be abstract, so that we can rationalize about it. In actual fact, it is a complex of experiences, a matrix of mini rituals, getting food, having a nap, putting up postcards. It is being in a cell, but it is also all these other things too, things that you do when you're not in a cell. Writing the text for this episode has strangely been quite calming for me. Maybe hearing about ritual could be a ritual itself. Most of the ideas here come from other people. I'm not claiming any originality, but maybe you feel that the world has been expanded a little bit. There is more out there than just this me thing that we have been told is all there is. As we prepare for resistance then, it is good to think about this expansiveness, that it is something real, something as real as anything else. Knowing that when we get in the cell, we can have a pee. All those rituals, both big and small.
Thanks for listening to Spirit of the Revolution. The full transcript of this episode and more of Roger's writings are available at rogerhallam.com. Please sign up there to give a donation every month to support this project. Calls from prison aren't cheap, and there's a whole team of us supporting Roger through this process. We're in this revolution together, so please chip in. Tune in next week for a new episode. See you then.